Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto went to Demon Slayer universe. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Numerous paintings surrounded him, as colorful as they were detailed. Shelves rose high above, framing the walls at every corner, defining a room without a single window in sight. The library was extensive, filled to the brim with scientific books of every kind. Biology, anthropology, botany, anatomy and physiology. Nothing was lacking in this place of knowledge. A grand table was before him, littered with open books, pens, papers, and many intricate writings. The lamp beside him was on, barely providing enough light for a normal person to see. But he was far from normal, needing only the smallest spark to experience sight. Muzan frowned deeply as he stood, the chair behind him falling to the floor. He took one sweeping glance across his notes, the endless writings he never ceased to create. No matter how much he studied, how much he read, how much he searched for that elusive flower, he always seemed that much further away from a solution. A solution to defeating certain death. His one and only fear. The very thought of death chilled him to the bone, made him afraid and furious all at once. When he was human, even before birth, death's icy grip had been around his neck, ever ready to snatch him from this world. As a baby in his mother's womb, his heart had stopped countless times. As a newborn, he had no breath, no pulse. And as a young man, he developed a fatal illness, one that weakened him and left him in constant pain and terror, wondering when his time would come. For as long as he could remember, him and death had been locked in a mortal struggle. Even after becoming a demon, even after overcoming the human lifespan, death still lingered, taking on two forms. Demon Slayers. And the sun. Muzan's fist collided with his table, splitting the wood in half. Books slid to the floor, disorder filled the room as papers fluttered about, sent airborne by the force of his swing. He clenched his hands, grotesque veins bulging along his powerful body. His mind was suddenly in a haze, that unbridled rage rising in pitch. Then there was knocking, a sound that caused his fangs to lengthen and his claws to sharpen. He'd warned them. He'd warned them not to disturb him at this time, and yet, the knocking persisted, reverberating through the silent room. Muzan's head snapped to the right. And he knew for a fact that he was going to kill whoever it was standing behind that door. Slowly, he began to move, eyes narrowing to slits. The banging continued. Louder. More persistent. Muzan opened the door, a split second away from beheading the person standing before him. Happy birthday, father. The king of demons paused. Below, wearing a pretty little dress, was his daughter. She looked up with a bright smile. Her eyes were wide with excitement, her rosy cheeks visible despite the darkness surrounding them. In her hands was a white and black hat, which she held up expectantly. Muzan's features instantly returned to normal, taking on that calm, kind expression it usually had when interacting with humans. He feigned surprise, then forced a smile across his pale features. Hanako, he whispered. What's the meaning of this? It's a present, she exclaimed happily. For your birthday tomorrow. Birthday? Must have been some made-up date he provided when he first met the mother. Muzan stooped down, getting on one knee. Aren't you supposed to be sleeping? She shuffled nervously. Yes. But I barely see you in the morning before school, and I wanted to surprise you early. Sweetheart. His tone was loving, smooth as ice. You didn't have to do this. I know, Hanako murmured. I wanted to, though. You always give me presents when you come back from those business trips. Muzan picked her up, taking the hat from her hands. I can't argue with that. Thank you. Try it on. Try it one, she proclaimed. And he did. How do I look? So cool, the girl said, looking up in awe. A moment later, Ray stepped forward. And very handsome, she added. The woman, his partner, gazed upon him with a smile. She drew closer and wrapped an arm around his neck, planting a gentle kiss on his lips. It was a lingering kiss, the woman's eyes closing as she pressed her body to his. Then she pulled away, that soft smile still on her face. You let her stay up? Asked Muzan. Of course, Tsukihiko, Rei said. She pulled him by the arm. It's only for one night. Since she rarely sees you during the day, she wanted to spend this time with you. Rei led him deeper into the mansion, toward the dining area. As they moved through her massive abode, Muzan was reminded of why he chose to enter a relationship with this woman. Her family was wealthy, old money from the Sengoku era. Thus, she had connections. Connections he could use to his advantage. Especially when procuring information concerning demon slayers and alleged locations of the blue spider lily. When they arrived at the table, he placed Hanako down, and she immediately rushed to a seat near him. A maid pulled out his chair, and Muzan sat, Rei following. The smell of human food reached his highly attuned senses. It was an odd scent, a familiar smell. Not horrible. But nothing compared to the taste of human flesh. He could stomach it, but it brought him no pleasure. Not even the slightest bit of sustenance or nutrition. But for the sake of keeping up appearances, he would humor these humans before him. So he played along, eating and chatting until midnight. By then, his daughter was falling asleep, eyes opening and closing while she tried to fight the weariness away. She blinked rapidly, nodding off as she continued to talk. I think it's time for bed, young lady, Rei said. Hanako yawned. But I'm not tired. No buts. Come now. Let Momo get you out of that dress. But I want to stay with father, she whined. Muzan forced a smile on his face. Listen to your mother, Hana. She continued to whine, even as she was carried away by the maid dressed in a black kimono. The meal was lovely, Rei. He stood up, wiping his hands with a cloth. But if you'll excuse me, I'd like to return to my work. Rei stood with him, gently grabbing his arm. Won't you come to bed with me? He ignored that hopeful look in her eyes, and the feeling of tightness in his chest. I'm sorry, Rei, he said sweetly. Not tonight. I've told you how stringent my clients are, haven't I? She thought for a moment, then nodded. Though sad, she still smiled with understanding. All right, darling. Only for tonight. However, I won't be so easily convinced tomorrow. Rei pulled him into another long kiss, before finally letting him go. Muzan walked straight to the library, still holding the hat Hanako had gifted him. He moved past paintings and statues until he reached a grand, wooden door. Then he froze, a distinct feeling washing over him. In succession, Muzan sensed the lives of lower rank 6 and 2 come to an end. And hours later, when the sun rose, lower rank 4 died as well. All in one single night. What is happening? In Caring Arms. The memories came as he awoke, much like a wave engulfing his mind without mercy. It flashed before his eyes. Every image. Every detail. Every sound. Their conversation. As well as her final words to him, spoken with regret, but also, with a semblance of relief. She died, and his clone stayed with her until the end. Mikago wasn't the first demon he'd watched die. He could name a dozen times this same scenario had occurred. Just waiting until the sun burst through the night sky. Most of them yelled and screamed at his clone. Others sat in silence, angrily. A few actually seemed to consider their lives in those last moments. But the majority continued trying to eat him, even as the end approached. Mikago had been a bit different. And though a hint of sympathy stabbed at his heart, the reality was that he couldn't save everyone. Especially those that didn't want to be saved. At least, you turned out differently, he thought. Susumaru was next him, reading. Her eyelids were heavy, but she refused to fall asleep, watching over him while also keeping herself entertained. Glancing around, Naruto realized he was on a bed. Her bed, to be exact. The room was dark, the windows covered to prevent even the smallest ray of sunlight from filtering through. A single lamp was on, providing enough light for him to make out her beautiful, peaceful features. Slowly, he sat up, the weariness of yesterday completely gone. Susumaru noticed his awakening, putting her book aside. Her smile was bright, if a bit teasing. "Afternoon, sleepy," she greeted. Naruto raised his arms in a long stretch. "Hey, Susumaru." His shirt was dry, replaced during his lengthy slumber. "Guess I was a bit more tired than I thought." "That's an understatement," Susumaru replied. She pouted playfully. "You fell asleep in the middle of our conversation." He rubbed his hair sheepishly. "Sorry about that. Were we talking about something important?" She thought for a moment, frowned, then shook her head. No. Not really." Susumaru leaned forward, observing him with a hint of concern. "How are you feeling?" "Great, actually." He noticed their proximity, and the loose-fitting kimono she was wearing. The last couple of nights must have really taken their toll. But a few hours of rest were enough for him to feel completely revitalized. Then a thought struck him, something that made Naruto stiffen. "Wait," he began. "Did you say it was afternoon?" Susumaru nodded, quickly adding, "If you're worried about the patients, don't be. Yuichiro and that demon slayer woman already assessed them earlier this morning." Naruto relaxed a bit, but asked, "Why didn't someone wake me up?" "Sorry. You just seemed so tired," Susumaru apologized. "You've been staying up to watch me, and then the lower moons attacked, and there's also your project, and healing all those people. I insisted no one disturb you, and Yuichiro agreed." "Oh. Okay." Naruto felt a pleasant feeling fluttering in his stomach. Truly, he was surrounded by people that genuinely cared about him. And he found it heartwarming. "Well, if you put it that way, I can't really complain." "Thanks." "No problem, Doc." Susumaru yawned in a manner he found adorable. Since it was afternoon, she would normally be asleep at this hour, only to awake when the sun began to set. "Tired?" "Yup." She didn't deny it. "Reading this book helped me stay up though. It's just that good." Jiraiya would have loved to hear someone say that about his work, Naruto thought. Susumaru yawned again, rubbing at her beautiful amber eyes. "You mumble in your sleep," she mentioned nonchalantly. "Do I?" Naruto remarked, to which she nodded. "Hopefully, I wasn't annoying." She shook her head. "It didn't happen often. And it wasn't too loud, either. It was just that name. Hinata. You whispered it a couple of times." Susumaru looked at him curiously. "Who is that, if you don't mind me asking?" "A lover." "A friend," he answered, unsure of why he'd said that. She was dead, though. Along with Niji and a few others the war had claimed. "Oh, okay." Susumaru shuffled silently, clenching her hands against her lap. Her cheeks suddenly reddened as she glanced at him, before quickly averting her gaze. "It's okay to ask when you want my blood, you know," Naruto assured softly. She looked at her feet. "I just don't want it to seem like I'm using you." Naruto gently flicked her forehead. "Stop. You're not using me. Just as Tamayo and Yashiro aren't using me. You're a demon. And you still need blood. So here." He pulled the covers aside, revealing his forearm. Susumaru seemed to shudder, her eyes locking with his own. She moved closer, then sat on the bed, her weight sinking the mattress slightly. Susumaru leaned in, moving further up. She tugged at the collar of his shirt, exposing his shoulder. Not his forearm this time. A different area. Somewhere closer, more intimate. She glanced at him once more, almost as if to ask, "Is this okay?" Naruto gave a single nod and she closed what little distance was left between them. Using her left arm for balance, her face remained just inches from the area between his shoulder and his neck. Finally, she lowered herself, teeth sinking into his flesh. Naruto felt a tremor run down his spine as she drew blood. She went deeper, but not enough to cause serious damage. Her eyes were shut, her body was still, and she ingested his crimson essence with a fervor unmatched by any other. Her desire wasn't desperate, nor was it ravenous, like that of a typical demon. It was gentle, lingering. It spoke of a passion for him, and only him. Naruto didn't stop her, even as her right hand came to caress his other shoulder, pulling him even closer. Unbidden, his heart began to race, and he was fully aware of the beautiful demon by his side. He glanced her way, eyes trailing every detail of that pristine, immaculate form. Her angular face. Her unblemished, ghostly white skin. And her onyx hair tinted orange at the tips. His favorite color. Susumaru drank her fill, then pulled away slowly, almost sadly, not wanting to leave the warmth his body provided. She found a cloth and pressed it to his shoulder, firmly, until the bleeding stopped. "Thank you," Susumaru said breathlessly. Her features were flushed, but her eyelids seemed to droop with weariness. Naruto tilted his head. "Does doing this make you want to sleep?" At that, she yawned. Then, smiled. "Not really. It just relaxes me. I'm only tired because I watched you mumble in your sleep all morning." "Oh, right." Naruto laughed softly. He got off the bed, leaving it for her to take. "Go on. You can sleep now. I'm all rested up." "You sure?" she asked tiredly. Her kimono was especially gorgeous in the dimly lit room. "Positive." So she conceded and laid down, a satisfied look on her face. "I appreciate you keeping me company, by the way." Susumaru waved him off as he opened the door to leave, another yawn on her lips. "Anytime, Naruto." He gently closed her door, then walked through the hallway. His heart still thudded his chest, that feeling of closeness lingering in his mind. He didn't know what to make of it. The gentle way she'd held him. The way she'd felt against his body. And the way her eyes seemed to light up when talking to him. The scene continued to play in his head, even as he paused at the door that housed his sealing jutsu. In that moment, Naruto was reminded of the fact that he would not be in this world forever, and that any feelings he was starting to experience weren't allowed to blossom, lest those involved end up hurt when it was time for him to leave. So he pushed those thoughts aside, forced them into the deepest recesses of his mind, as he finally made his way upstairs. While not as hectic as last night, his clinic was still at full capacity. So much so that they'd had to bring in new, unused medical beds from a storage area in the basement. I bet Sakura would be shocked to see this place, Naruto thought wistfully. As he moved forward, Naruto felt the familiar sensation of a cat. He looked down, greeted by the sight of Kimiko. She rubbed up against him, purring with her tail held high. He reached down to stroke her fur, the rumbling in her throat rising in volume. After a few moments of petting, his cat departed, padding down the stairs, presumably to Susumaru's room. Kimiko really likes her. When Naruto entered the main area, everyone stopped to look at him. Most were on their beds, reading or talking. He waved and they all waved back, many of them greeting him with smiles and thanks and shouts of "Good afternoon." Naruto stopped by a few patients, in which he gave them a quick assessment. Truth be told, they were doing fine. Many of them looked far healthier than they did last night. He made a mental note to thank Yuichiro and Shinobu for their efforts while he'd been asleep. Next, he went to see his most critical patient, one of the few that had been brought to the clinic from a nearby hospital. She was sleeping, but her dressings were fresh, minimal blood coating the bandages around her arms and legs and neck. Naruto drew closer, then continued the healing process with hands outstretched, chakra flowing into her most serious wounds. He made sure to focus on her trachea, damaged by biting, snapping teeth. Once finished, he continued through the house, the smell of food suddenly reaching his nostrils. Naruto made his way toward the massive kitchen. To his surprise, both Jiro and Yuichiro were there, cooking up meals for everyone in the clinic. "That smells incredible," he announced, crossing his arms as he stood at the entrance. Both of them paused, then turned to face him. "Doctor!" Jiro exclaimed, smiling from ear to ear. "That's me," Naruto said with a grin. "Now this is a sight to behold." The man added a bit of seasoning to the food he was boiling. "I did promise to make you something. So, here I am. It's not ramen, but I think you'll like it just as much." "I'll be the judge of that," said Naruto. He moved closer, just enough to inspect the contents of the pots being used. "You're in an awfully good mood. More so than usual." Yuichiro pinned him with a curious look. "How are you feeling?" "Better than ever," the blonde said, cracking his knuckles. "Seriously, though. I just needed a bit of rest, that's all." The teen nodded slowly, then returned to cooking. "I've never seen you sleep for that long, so I was a bit concerned. Still, if you say you're okay, I'll believe you. But take it easy today, okay?" "Sure, Yui, since you're so worried about me." Naruto tousled the teen's beautiful, turquoise-tinted hair. "I hear something big went down last night," said Jiro. He stirred the pot with a large spoon. "If all these new patients aren't an indication, I don't know what else is." Naruto regarded the man for a moment, considering his next words. "I already told him some details," Yuichiro spoke first. "Even about the demons?" The teen nodded. "So," Naruto said, "then you're aware that one of the demons involved was the one that attacked your home and killed your wife?" "Yeah," whispered Jiro. "But you got rid of him though, right?" "I did," Naruto answered firmly. "I made sure of it too." The man took a deep breath, a look of relief on his face. "Then I can rest easy, knowing that my wife has been avenged." He glanced at Naruto with a small, sad smile. "Things will always be different now that she's gone, but I'm glad you took care of the situation." "Thank you." They resumed cooking, chatting for several minutes more. When Naruto decided it was time to leave, Yuichiro stopped him, a hand gently gripping the hem of his shirt. "Two things," Yuichiro began. "Ozaki and Murata. They still need you to check on their wounds. Their injuries aren't horrible, but I'm sure they would appreciate your help." The teen paused, considering what he was going to say next. "Also, when you have the time, I'd like to tell you something important. About my brother." Naruto leaned forward. "Your brother?" Yuichiro's smile was happy, yet tentative. "Yeah. But don't worry about that for now. Please help those two first." "Sure," Naruto said, his curiosity rising. But he respected his student's wishes and pried no further. "Where's Miss Kocho, by the way? I haven't seen her yet." "She went out to get supplies for when she returns to headquarters, or something." The teen shrugged. He returned to cooking, and Naruto began to make his way upstairs. Before he did, however, the blonde paused at the front door, catching sight of Kaneo. Like last night, she was sitting on the porch, staring into the distance as she observed his garden. She didn't have her sword with her, not at the moment, because he had put them in a safe place, just in case she or Shinobu tried anything. It was just a precaution, nothing malicious, and surprisingly, Shinobu had agreed. Kaneo seemed to be doing okay, so Naruto moved on, climbing up the stairs. Up here, there were more rooms, one of which housed the first demon slayers he'd encountered in Tokyo. Pausing at the door, he knocked softly, waited, then entered the room. "Afternoon, you two," he said. Each on a separate bed, both of them greeted him in return. "Ichim. I haven't seen you out of your uniforms before." Naruto walked in. He stood at a sink, thoroughly washing his hands. Murata chuckled, rubbing his hair. I know. Feels like I'm always wearing it. I can't remember the last time I wore something else during the day, Ozaki added as Naruto moved closer. Well, you certainly look different. More relaxed, in a way. He began with Ozaki, pulling a stool beside her bed. Did you sleep okay? She nodded, extending her arms so Naruto could unwrap the blood-saturated bandages. Thanks to Yuichiro's medication, yeah. That's good to hear. Naruto focused, then released his chakra into her wound, a vicious bite. Afterward, he moved on to her forehead, where a deep cut could be seen. He healed that area as well, much quicker than he would have last night. Naruto went to Murata next. His injuries were worse than Ozaki's, but still treatable within a span of 10 minutes. He also checked to see if the teen's ribs were broken, assessing his lungs in the process. Finding nothing out of the ordinary, Naruto clasped both hands together. You're all good now, he said. I appreciate you two waiting so that the other patients could be taken care of first. Of course, said Murata, a proud look in his eyes. We're demon slayers. A little pain is nothing. Naruto chuckled and stood up, wrapping fresh bandages around what was left of their injuries, which wasn't much. He'd return to inspect them again in a few hours, though. With that, Naruto bid them farewell, intent on taking a long, warm bath. Later, Shinobu walked along the city street, a bag strewn around her shoulder. By now, it was heavy, stuffed to the brim with medical supplies found only in Tokyo. She'd been at this for an hour or so, moving from store to store, from pharmacy to pharmacy, stocking up on things that weren't as easily accessible near the countryside. Mind-focused, she barely registered the fact that she'd traveled past Naruma and entered Nakano, a place considerably more developed than the former ward. Still, she pressed on, searching for medications she could add to her collection back at headquarters. As Shinobu continued through the city, thoughts of last night continued to fill her mind. Images of that battle. Images of a certain blonde and his demon friend. And of course, images of Yuichiro Takedo, the twin brother of her fellow Mist Hashira, Michiro. To think, Michiro had a brother. A twin, no less. It was baffling to her. While many of the Hashira liked to keep to themselves, they still knew quite a bit about each other. Everyone knew her sister, Kane, for instance. But the Mist Hashira having a brother? Not even a word of it had been said. Well, in Michiro's defense, he was very young, and he never really fit in with the rest of them, part of that due to age. And he had certain problem with remembering things. But still, this was big news. One she would be sure to carry with her on the return trip back to headquarters. Shinobu turned at a street corner, finding a relatively small pharmacy with moderate amounts of customers. She paused to inspect the contents being sold, then nodded to herself. The prices weren't outrageous, and the medicine was of a higher quality. So, she decided to stay, sifting through materials and tools she could bring back with her. Once again, her mind drifted to the blonde doctor. Even now, Shinobu could hardly believe she'd decided to stay with him, considering the fact that he housed a demon. But the thought of getting him on the Demon Slayer Corps' side had been so irresistible that she would have been a fool to refuse his offer. Not only that, though. There was something about him, something familiar in that blue gaze. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. But it was enough to arouse her interest. I wonder how he'll react once I ask him to join the Corps, she thought. Finally, she gathered all the supplies she wanted and went to pay. The owner was an older gentleman, dressed in a gray yukata. He looked through her selection, calculated the price, then helped her put them in a small basket. Thank you, sir, Shinobu said with a bright smile. You have a very nice store. Much better than the others around here. I appreciate that, young lady. The man dipped his head once, handing her the recently purchased supplies. You be careful, all right? There's been some strange things happening around here. Wouldn't want someone so young getting caught up in trouble. Her smile brightened. I'll take that into consideration. Shinobu departed. By now, it was well past noon. So she made her way back toward Naruma, bag of supplies even heavier. Instead of going around the scene of yesterday's initial attack, she went toward it, steering through the crowd that had been here since morning. Most of them were curious onlookers. Some were reporters, taking pictures and writing notes. Others were police officers, keeping the people at bay. Shinobu paused just outside the ring of onlookers. She observed the damaged street, sharp eyes finding claw marks and blood stains on the road. To her left, an entire building had been cut in half. To her right, another building had collapsed, a human-shaped hole in the entrance. He really fought all three of them at once, she remarked. Shinobu almost chuckled. A single lower moon wasn't the most difficult battle a Hashira could face. But three at once? With unknown abilities, to boot. Coupled with a hostage situation. Even she would have struggled, and most likely would have been given life-threatening injuries. Just who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? Shinobu's gaze snapped forward, past the crowd, toward two people she instantly recognized. A smile curled across her lips. She sprinted forward, invisible to normal humans, and appeared in front of them, a rush of wind signaling her arrival. So you're here, too? Shinobu asked happily. Both women jumped, startled by her sudden arrival. They tensed, hands reaching for their kunai, until recognition flickered across their features. It was Suma and Makio, two of the Sound Hashira's three wives. Lady Kocho! Suma exclaimed, eyes growing to the size of dinner plates. I can't believe it. Makio, look. She tugged at her fellow wife's arm. It's Lady Kocho. Makio's brow twitched. I know, Suma, she deadpanned. I see her right in front of me. Suma rubbed her onyx hair sheepishly, even as Shinobu looked upon them with amusement. My word, she remarked. You two never change. Makio lowered her head in respect. And seeing that Suma hadn't done the same, she lowered her fellow wife's head with a swift hand. Suma yelped innocently, quickly bowing as well. Greetings, Lady Kocho, Makio began. It's a pleasure to see you here in Tokyo. Likewise. Shinobu pulled her bag tighter. She soon noticed the Kasugai crow on Makio's shoulder. I'm assuming you received the message concerning last night's attack. Yes, ma'am, Suma replied. This little bird flew all the way to our home. It told us about the situation. And even though I was tired and hungry, and I didn't really feel like coming, Makio sent her a non-malicious glare, we still gladly traveled through the night to get here, she added quickly. Shinobu asked, then Tengen is here as well? Yes, Makio answered this time. He and Hinetsuru are investigating the forest outside the city. We can go find him if you wish. No. That won't be necessary. Shinobu stretched out a hand, and Ozaki's crow flew to her. In fact, there's nothing to worry about at all. Makio cocked a brow. But the 12 Kazuki that attacked. 2 of them have already been killed, Shinobu revealed. A pause. What a relief, blurted Suma, before she froze. I mean, I'm grateful the situation has been handled. Is this true, Lady Kocho? Makio inquired, even she looked relieved. Absolutely, Shinobu said cheerfully. Save for one, me and a certain doctor were able to kill them. A doctor? Suma echoed. In any case, this is good news, Makio interjected. Tengen will want to hear about this. Shinobu nodded knowingly. Oh, I'm sure he will. Ozaki's crow found his way to her shoulder as she pulled out a slip of paper and wrote something against the wall of a building. These are directions. When you see Tengen, tell him to come to this place if he gets the chance. That's where I'll be staying for a few days. Makio took the paper, then bowed her head, Suma doing the same. Thank you for the information, Lady Kocho, Makio said. We'll pass this along to him as soon as possible. Take care, then, ladies, Shinobu said happily. She began walking away, waving over her shoulder. Given the severity of the situation, it was no surprise to her that another Hashira was now involved. Shinobu glanced at the crow on her shoulder. She reached up to pet him, fingers running through black feathers. He squawked loudly, obviously pleased by her actions. Oh, my. You're a noisy one, aren't you? She said. Nevertheless, I appreciate your efforts. What would the Demon Slayer Corps do without you and the other crows helping us? She bought him a snack, which he quickly devoured, before heading back to the clinic. By the time she arrived, Naruto's garden was alight with activity. Children, once injured, were out and about. They ran and played, giggling happily, their delighted shouts filling her ears. Other patients, still in hospital attire, sat on the porch or near the pond. They each had a meal in hand, eating and talking as a gentle wind blew. It ruffled Shinobu's hair, bringing with it a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. She felt a small smile tug at her lips, a genuine smile. Shinobu found Kaneo standing near the pond, staring into the water. She drew near and put a hand on her student's shoulder. The koi are quite beautiful, aren't they? Kaneo nodded once, then continued her observation of the colorful fish. So Shinobu left her to it, intent on finding Naruto. She entered the clinic and saw Yuichiro, Ozaki, and Murata talking. Shinobu stopped by them, handing Ozaki her Kasugai crow. The teen beamed and hugged her bird closely. Sora, she said happily. You did such a good job yesterday. Her bird cooed, flapping his wings at the praise. Shinobu turned to Yuichiro. Do you know where Dr. Uzumaki is? He looked just like Michiro, especially the way he cocked his head to the side. He's upstairs, I think. Nodding, she made her way there. And when she arrived, Shinobu was immediately greeted by the sight of the blonde doctor. He was in one of the unlocked rooms, hair glistening like the sun. He had a towel on his head, which he used to dry his golden locks. He was also shirtless, his defined physique on full display. Her eyes trailed his body subtly, mapping out every bump and curve of muscle, etched into his tan torso. Broad shoulders. A powerful back. Lean, yet noticeable brawn. He was quite handsome, too, she mused. And those whiskered cheeks added to his strange, yet alluring appeal. Pardon me, Shinobu said, masking her interest with an innocent smile. She turned to leave the room, but he waved her off. Don't worry about it. Naruto rubbed his hair some more. Were you looking for me? Yes, I was. Shinobu tore her eyes away from his chest. What's the situation with the last lower moon? She's dead, Naruto answered, throwing the towel over his shoulder. The memories of my clone came to me earlier today. The insect Hashira only shook her head, a gentle laugh on her lips. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. But your abilities never cease to fascinate me. She paused, then said, I ran into some of my subordinates in town. Naruto groaned playfully. More of you guys. She smirked. And I apologize for not talking to you first, but I asked that they stop by the clinic for a chat. If you disapprove, I'll make sure they don't set foot in here. Naruto frowned. I don't want another fight, you know. I'm aware. I'll make sure nothing happens, she said sincerely. I only want to talk and have one of them meet you. But only if you want. As long as you don't mention Susumaru, they're free to come here, Naruto answered. That's perfectly acceptable. Late afternoon. Almost everyone was outside. Save for the woman with the vicious bites, the former hostages and those brought in from the hospitals walked about, enjoying the scenery Susumaru had recently cultivated. For someone who wasn't an expert gardener, she certainly did a fine job. The children still played and ran. Keiko, who recently had an amputation, also moved around, already accustomed to her artificial limb. Now, Naruto was no expert on prosthetics, but Yuichiro certainly was. The teen had a talent even he couldn't fathom, despite lacking arm himself. He'd made this device for the girl, and Naruto honestly thought it was an amazing piece of engineering. With documentation completed, Naruto could finally relax. He left the clinic with a warm bowl of soup in hand. Finding Kaneo sitting on the porch, Naruto handed her the food. She stared at him for a moment, flipped a coin, then accepted the meal. "Thank you," Kaneo said flatly. Naruto arched a brow, but said nothing, figuring that it wasn't his place to pry, or try to analyze her eccentric behavior. When the sun began to set, Yuichiro found him lounging under a tree. Arms behind his head and eyes closed, Naruto noticed his student long before the teen even spoke. "Do you have a minute, Naruto?" "Sure do," he answered, patting a spot next to him. "Come on, take a seat." Yuichiro complied and found a place beside him. They sat in silence for a time. Not an awkward kind of quiet, but the comfortable kind. Both of them watched the sun sinking in the distance, painting the clouds red. Even Shinobu was looking up. The insect Hashira was seated on a bench. She was writing something, paper still in hand. Most likely that report she'd mentioned. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.